Hello and welcome to the 33rd episode of the Mike McNair Revolutionary Strategy Series. Today is Monday the 9th of December 2019 and I'm your host Tom O'Brien. Today we continue with Chapter 9, Republican Democracy. Talk about the ills of bureaucratic centralism. This week I have the new patrons Werner Fresvig, Shane Kaleli and Evan Thome to thank. If you would like to help keep the Good Ship Alpha afloat and keep the episodes flowing, why not join the Patreon gang? From $5 a month or $1 an episode, you get access to the special patron-only bonus episodes, the right to vote on the reading group series, and other cool stuff too. If you don't have any spare dough, I'm always looking for people to help with editing or producing the show. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook if you're interested. If you'd like to comment on the show, please do so on the YouTube channel. Make sure to like, subscribe and share. Okay, to the discussion. Now, Pouya, let's do some commentarianism.
Okay. The primary inheritors in today's politics of the ideas of the early Comintern are the Trotskyist and ex-Trotskyist organizations. To a lesser extent, the same is true of Maoist groups. Although, since the right turn of the Beijing in 1980s, these have become smaller and less influential. Both sets of ideas have had a wider influence in diluted form through ex-member independents who have got fed up with the organizations but have not made a systematic critique of their politics. The main burden of Chapter 4 to 8 has been to try to separate out those elements in the ideas of a Comintern which are rational responses to strategic problems from those which are blind alleys that lend support to the refusal of the organized groups and independents alike to unite effectively. This was particularly relevant to defeatism, the party of a new type, and to the general staff of the World Revolution. The reverse of a coin, in the case of the Trotskyist groups and independents, in the use of the United Front and workers' government slogans to justify diplomatic deals with elements of the official, i.e. coalitionist and nationalist left, these almost inevitably involve non-sectarian sectarianism, i.e. sectarianism to the left and opportunism to the right. The phenomenon can be seen in full flower with the SWP. It also informs the LCR majority's use of United Front policy to evade the problem of disunity between the League and the Lutte ouvrière. The struggle for a united and effective left in the workers' movement has therefore unavoidably involves a struggle for the definite break with the errors of the early Comintern that have been inherited by the Trotskyists and with the Trotskyists' own errors in interpreting the Comintern materials. In several countries, partial gains have been made by the left unity. Partial willingness to break with bureaucratic centralism has been key to both the unity and the gains. In England, the US, France, and Argentina, this has been absent and no progress has been made. In Argentina, in spite of the conditions of acute crisis in 2002-01. At present, however, it seems depressingly likely that the continued coalitionism of the former official communists and the Maoist and Trotskyist diplomatic version of the United Front will result in these gains coming to nothing. The fate of the Brazilian Workers' Party seems a clear example. If this depressing vista comes true, the Trotskyist sects will no doubt say, "There you go, told you so." But, as the failure of the sects in England, the US, France, and Argentina shows, the truth will be that there has been an insufficiently critical break with the inheritance of the early Comintern.
I found this interesting here. This paragraph here where he talks about what do Trotskyist groups end up doing. He says here that in the case of both Trotskyist groups and independents, it's the use of United Front and worker government slogans to justify diplomatic deals with elements of the official, i.e. coalitionist and nationalist left. These almost invariably involve non-sectarian sectarianism, i.e. sectarianism to their left and opportunism to their right. That's got to be, I think that's very true. When they go into these kind of coalition-y kind of stuff, don't they end up, United Fronts, they end up basically censoring their own radical leftness so that they can fit into these right United Fronts.
I guess, yeah, like that's true, but then also like because of the fact that they haven't been sufficiently critical about their Comintern heritage, I also kind of like write them off. Like my point of view is not that, if they were not censoring their left-wing point of view, they would be effective. because I don't think they would be effective in any case because of this Comintern heritage that McNair points to. Like, I think that democratic centralism in that like Leninist form is just going to be the death of them one way or the other. Doesn't matter if they fight with their coalitionist partners.
I had a question about the last paragraph in this section. It says, at present, however, it seems depressingly likely that the continued coalition of the former official communists and Maoists and the Trotskyist diplomatic version of the United Front will result in these gains coming to nothing. The fate of the Brazilian Workers' Party seems a clear example. If this depressing visit comes true, the Trotskyist sects will no doubt say, "There, told you so." That "there, told you so." Like, what the? Isn't he Like, I'm just kind of confused about that line.
I think this is the sort of like sectarianism, right? That it's like, oh well, they weren't the ones in that position, so they're going to say "there, told you so" because you weren't sufficiently pure or whatever.
So basically, it's like one Trotskyist sect finger wagging at the other, who did more of a coalitionist United Front thing, right?
Yeah, I don't think the Workers' Party was exactly Trotskyist, but yes, there was an influence there. Yeah.
In this section, he says that partial willingness to break with bureaucratic centralism has been key to both the unity and the gains. While later he says positions on the Soviet Union don't matter. Elsewhere in the chapter, he says people that have a bureaucratic centralist party will set up a bureaucratic centralist regime. There's just a painful inconsistency. It just sticks out at me like a sore thumb. I mean, your theory of, what the Soviet Union is and how it relates to what you'd like to build.
I think he was saying that your theory in the Soviet Union doesn't matter in the context of like Soviet defensism. Because if I remember that line correctly, he's talking specifically about that. And he says, like, that's a matter of Marxist theory, which is all fine and good, but it's a matter of strategy. It doesn't exist anymore, so it's meaningless.
I think I don't...
You think he's being insincere?
Well, no, I just think there's something like underrepresented. Like there's another break that we need to make, essentially, that he doesn't argue for as passionately as he does, as he argues for the break with the loyalists, which makes sense because, we're, I guess, dealing with a ghost, but that I think is important, ultimately.
Dismissing it too much, but the most of the left does not dismiss it as much as he's dismissing it.
Well, and even on paper, like, he agrees it's important to not be seen as this, but it definitely has an impact on theory. Even if I don't know, you could disentangle the things, but in practice, people's theory of that society does have something to do with what they want. A party that advocates this kind of thing and organizes on these kind of lines, their theories of organization, in his mind, have an impact on the kind of party state that they'd produce. It's just something I keep tripping on. Now that I see it, I can't unsee it.
Well, maybe this is a failure of him to not include you have to have another axis to really like get at that, because like if we're breaking more clearly with Leninism, and if we're doing that, like, capital L Leninism isn't easily tractable on the left, right, center
correct
kind of scale. And so there needs to be, like, if we're going to like break with something that isn't measurable by McNair's own scale, the scale is flawed.
Well, the scale it's not designed to highlight that difference. You have Leninist positions on the left, you have Leninist positions in the center, and Leninist positions on the right. This isn't going to tell you about that.
I mean, maybe that's kind of like hinting at his own, like, his overly willingness to be sympathetic with it, like pointing at that tradition that he has come from.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd have to write a whole nother book with a whole nother set of positions to argue for this break or something. Sure. It's not his ultimate point.
When we say Leninist, what do we mean? Do we say, is it the break from the right and democratic centralism? Is that what people mean by Leninism?
No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is like break with Stalinism and Stalin adjacent people. Like this would include Trotskyism as well, in essence, because Trotskyism kind of it's like the left-wing version of Stalinism with the forced collectivization, and that left-wing communist in the Comintern is something that Stalin eventually ended up doing, right? So in the end, like all of Leninism kind of has this, at least I'm arguing, extrapolating from your arguments, that like it has like an authoritarian streak that can't be captured well on the right, center, left scale.
It is something that he's kind of getting at with the break from Cominternism, that he mentions here. And I think that is close to what I'm saying. But even, Trotskyists that claim to be very critical of the first four Congresses, which McNair most resembles, and then even people like Amadeo Bordiga and his followers that are Leninists that believe that Lenin lost the way, in the Civil War. You know what I mean? They're breaking because of Bolshevization, and so they have a separate position from even the Trotskyists that kind of like actually fucking Bordigas. Then some of them do accept Cominternism ultimately. I don't know what Leninism means if it's not Cominternism or some kind of like Stalinism. I just don't,
I think that's the understanding that we have developed in reading this book over this whole series of discussions and like getting to grips of like what we mean by Leninism and how that's connected to like Zinoviev and all that kind of stuff. I think that rings true to me.
Maybe calling it Cominternism instead of Leninism is too obscuritan is kind of the issue that we're like trying to deal with. Like it's not like really pointing out what the problem is, because Lenin is still a popular figure among communists, and I don't think we should just like throw all your Lenin books away. But like,
right,
what the ism of it is, and the man himself eventually is problematic, and you have to just deal with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so this insufficiently critical break is, the question is how sufficiently critical can you be? Is McNair sufficiently critical to do the thing that he's saying that he wants to do?
Okay, will we try one more section? I'm going to read some of these. Strategy. The strategic coordinates that I have positively argued for in the last 8 chapters can be summarized as follows. 1. There is no way forward from capitalism other than self-emancipation of the working class. The ideas of a peasant-led revolution or of a long-term strategic alliance of the proletariat and peasantry as equals, of advanced social democracy, or of a broad democratic alliance have all been proved false. They have been proved false by the fate of the socialist countries and by the fact that the fall of the USSR, combined with the decay of the US-led world economic order, has led to increased attacks on the concessions that capital made to social democratic and left nationalist governments elsewhere in order to contain communism. The idea of the movement of movements has proved with extraordinary rapidity to lead nowhere. 2. The working class here means the whole social class dependent on the wage fund, including employed and unemployed, unwaged women, homemakers, youth and pensioners. It does not just mean the employed workers, still less the productive workers or the workers in industry. This class has the potential to lead society forward beyond capitalism because it is separated from the means of production and hence forced to cooperate and organize to defend its interests. This cooperation foreshadows the free cooperative appropriation of the means of production that is communism. 3. The self-emancipation of the working class requires the working class to lay its hands collectively on the means of production. This does not mean state ownership of the means of production, which is merely a legal form. Without democratic republicanism, the legal form of state ownership means private ownership by state bureaucrats. It means that the working class collectively decides how the means of production are used. Okay, let's stop it there. The working class is the whole social class. Anybody have any problems with that? No, let's move on.
I think this is like a really interesting definition of the working class that I've not encountered yet. And
really,
yeah,
it's Marx's definition.
Yeah, no, but I think Marx's definition is kind of. I don't think he would include a lot of these people in the working class. I think
he would.
It is the whole thing about like these people are not part of the working class is like a legacy of form of the workers' movement over the last 100 such years, and the way that they represented themselves as Marxists. Marx's definition is consistent with this definition.
I'm sure it is, but I think like this would lead to like a lot of people that we normally wouldn't consider being workers that aren't listed here being workers, like students.
Well, let's put it this way. I don't know. There was the classical workers movement going on at that time, and there is this category in Marx of the lumpen proletariat that he does tend to get away from, but every so often he'll just go on a tirade about the social scum, like these parasites. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't think he's calling children and pensioners parasites, Marx, and I don't think he's calling like mothers.
But I think you could include them. Like, I think you could include the lumpen in with this definition.
You know, a lot of lumpen are proletarian, like really, like, and that is their actual like class relation. If you're not, you know, if you're not including like certain kinds of, I don't know, an analysis of legality, if you're not seeing if they're earning a wage on a proper market or the black market or what have you, like they're proles.
Drug dealer.
Yeah, I mean,
like a drug dealer,
like a drug dealer is like a merchant, right?
He's not.
They have a form of capital.
Yeah, but like a homeless person, like on the street.
They're still working class.
Well, this is a difference from the classical conception of the workers' movement. And Marx is maybe a bit inconsistent on this, but I think he improves as he gets older when he switches more to the kind of the analysis of surplus proletariat being the pole of surplus capital and that sort of thing. He gets better about this. But yeah, like what Pouya is saying is I think should be deeply felt, that the classic workers' movement and including Marx to some degree, this is, you know, a pretty forward-thinking definition that wasn't consistently applied very often in the history of the workers' movement. When it was when the workers were the closest to revolution.
I think we're going to get into this a lot more when we look at the 18th Brumaire, where the lumpen proletariat is given explanatory value in explaining what happened there, right? The category of the lumpen proletariat is used by Marx to explain the rise of Louis Napoleon, right?
I'm just looking at my Capital volume here, and I don't think the word proletariat is not in the index. Yeah, not to mention lumpen proletariat. It's actually not in Capital.
Yeah, Capital is the late work where he's improved, right?
Yeah,
like his middle political writings, you know, from the Communist Manifesto to just after the Paris Commune, where he says, you know, the sex workers are these fucking parasites. They followed the smell of their johns, like hoes mad that we abolished the state, you know, up through the 18th Brumaire. Like there is, you know, there's more of that stuff there than there is in Capital. Capital is for all that dry, dead political economy language he takes on, he drastically improves on the moralism against the lumpen.
Yes.
Well, it's also for both the lumpen and like on, you know, what's often called in socialism, socialist theory, the women's question. Marx, the man, is incredibly inconsistent, both theoretically and personally. Like, let's take sex work, for example. Like, he like dunks on sex work, you know, in the aftermath of the Paris Commune. But then, you know, in his earlier writings, The Holy Family, you know, he's talking about like a piece of literature, and he says like the only person who's like a real human in the story is the sex worker.
Well, let alone in the Communist Manifesto, where he makes the broader parallels between marriage and sex work.
Right. And so sometimes like Marx is like woke AF on like women's issues in the lumpen, and other time not so much. And I honestly think he's better on women's issues than he is on lumpen, TBH. Like, you know, I'm a dirty punk girl. Like, I stand the lumpen, you know, but I also see like it's a super like under theorized category.
And same with students. Like, I feel like students could be like many different classes depending.
Students are scum now, let's be honest. I've just looked up all volumes of Capital. There's now one in the index. Proletarian does not exist.
Really?
Well, I mean, maybe
lumpen proletariat doesn't exist in all three volumes.
I mean, proletariat is probably used too often in Capital to put in the index.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if it does not exist in Capital.
I'm telling you, I've been doing a reading group of Volume 1. We're halfway through it, and I haven't seen the word proletarian yet.
Damn.
Okay.
Before we get into it, Pouya just wants to say that he wishes he said the word probable here and somewhere. Right, come on, Pouya, make your point.
Oh my God.
I don't like here he says like the peasant revolution, this stuff is falsified by this stuff. Yeah, I don't think that holds water. And he kind of sounds like a Popperian or something. He has a different methodology here than he did before.
He's basically making the point that these things have repeatedly failed. these alliances idea of a peasant-led revolution or a strategic alliance with proletarian peasantry is always led back to capitalism.
But
Pouya thinks that this
like,
should be talked about in a probabilistic way.
no,
Am I correct?
I think like
No.
no, because first of all, like this is why like the Popperian methodology. This is why it's not good, because you can never just like falsify a theory like based
Of
on
course,
the
of course.
yeah, and
But like I know, but it's like it's just talking in plain English to try and make a point. I think we can't always go back to the same thing of like we have this argument every week where we go like, even though it fails 7 times doesn't necessarily mean it's false, because it mightn't be a good sample, essentially. So
no, but like this could be due
you
to
can't disprove it.
And I also don't think that this is a very good argument, anyways, because it's like the peasant-led revolution caused the USSR to collapse. First of all, I don't think it's like a good like it doesn't show anything.
Well, essentially what you're saying is that like this kind of causation cannot be established no matter how many examples we have.
No.
Ben,
or
what are you saying?
Well, I'm saying
we're all picking on Pouya now here. We're all picking
I really
want Lexi.
Like this could be due to a third variable that's like okay, this could be due to a third variable that he's like not addressing at all. And I think it's very likely that it is. And it's not due to like the idea of a peasant. Like I don't think that's why the USSR fell.
I mean, it's that's very well possible.
It is possible, but like, are we not kind of historical materialists?
Yeah, like I think like, the point that you're making is that historical materialists, will sort of default to certain kinds of variables, and that those are, ballpark probably the basic explanatory factors. And if we have a theoretical framework for historical materialism, I mean, like honestly, like if you're a historical materialist, this might be too concrete. We might be too far up into the social and political or something along those lines, I suppose. But the point being is that there are certain like zones of agency. This could very well be. I see it as at least plausible that that this is a big reason why that you couldn't have communism, is that you weren't just representing a bunch of proletarians. Like you had to represent something else. But again, it could be a third variable. It could be a sort of shared Kautskyan, Leninist sort of statism or something. It could be something else.
The economy.
When he says like peasant revolution, like think about it, that implies a certain state of development. Like if you had a peasant-led revolution today in America, it'd be 3% of the population. It couldn't possibly be a thing. So like when he's saying that, it's like a placeholder for the idea of a developed economy. They both are, it's the same thing.
Right. If you have a developed capitalist economy, you won't have peasants. So that's just kind of...
But what does he mean by this? Like the idea of a peasant-led revolution? Is he saying that a peasant-led revolution is impossible?
He's saying that a peasant-led communist revolution will descend into capitalism again. That's what he's saying. Is he not saying, look, of a long-term strategic alliance of the proletariat and peasantry as equals, of advanced social democracy, or of a broad democratic alliance, all these different ones have proved false?
It has to be taken as a given that like he's speaking here from a communist perspective, because this is like about communist strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the point is well taken that perhaps, if you're a historical materialist, maybe, it's really the level of productive forces or something, you know what I mean? Like, and that he's making the point and he's isolating. Well, really what it is that, there's the class composition that you end up with. And if you're trying to pull a revolution with a certain kind of class, you're going to run into these problems. This is the only class composition that's going to lead to a communist revolution.
But also, Lexi, you said, does evidence that something is untrue in science, there's like really good theories and they come up with like inconsistencies all the time. They're not falsified. Some of the best theories, like even quantum mechanics, like we did
high level astrophysics,
like we did simulations with molecules, and we were like predicting some transition state in a reaction, like they did that reaction, and then the transition state wasn't there, even though the quantum theory like predicted that it would be. And then they made up this auxiliary hypothesis that was like, we're not detecting it because it's like not rate limiting in the reaction, like because this transition state is there for so little time. You know,
You
there's just
can't
like,
measure it.
yeah, like, but even though like, so there's like these inconsistencies, these empirical inconsistencies that happen with like the best theories all the time. Even though like the quantum theory predicted the initial chemical and the final chemical perfectly good, it also predicted a middle chemical, like in the middle of reaction.
I don't know. It's possible that there's like a form of scientific induction that's not really, viable in social science, but it would make a lot of scientific socialism moot. Essentially, there wouldn't be a lot of reason to be doing this. It would be as absurd as counting angels on the head of a pin to try to, infer from social phenomena. And Marxists, to a degree, are relying that you can't perfectly predict, because otherwise, all the forms that we've seen so far are all the forms that we can expect to see. We shouldn't expect to see communism or statelessness or anything like that. So I hear your point, and Marxists all have a touch of that. And, McNair and I, and certainly, people like Tom and Kyle are people that are like pushing back on this sort of total, sort of nausea about establishing causality.
What am I doing? I don't understand what I was doing there.
Well, like, think about the postmodern left, the post-structuralist left, and their views on causality. Or even when somebody like David Harvey looks at dialectics, he thinks that there's no causal language, like that the secret to dialectics is that causality has nothing to do with it, right? The mainstream norms of social science, believe that you can establish some levels of causality. In some ways, this is a break from the leftism that we've sort of inherited from Gen X.
Being a student in the social sciences, that's definitely true. Like causality in psychology is incredibly overly empirical. Yeah, I'm the first to admit that, but it is pretty much the mainstream view in bourgeois social science, if you will.
I just think that in these situations, Pouya, you're dealing with such a system of such a high complexity that it's not so amenable to the type of experimentation that you're talking about in, say, the physical sciences. And what you kind of have to do when you're dealing with these systems is, like, you can theorize as well, but also you got to kind of look at what has happened and try to make Bayesian judgments on them. Well, and in your language, you may say, look, these have all been a failure. We need to try something new. You're not saying that, I'm not saying that my analysis is totally 100% right, but like you have to go on small samples.
Ensembles.
Yeah, you do. And you have to like try and piece together from that theoretical understanding. And you know what I mean? I don't think, like, I look at the 20th century and you look at how we've gone through all these different analyses of all the stuff. Like none of the ones that have been tried have worked. And a lot of them have been tried many, many, many times. And the obvious flaws of them are plain for us to see. That's just the way I look at it from a kind of a practical historical approach. I don't know how amenable it is to like a Markov chain analysis. I mean that seriously, because
I think it's
you don't know
difficult predicting. If I was thinking about it, I was like, how would you do this with a Markov chain? And then I was like, it's very difficult because from each mode of production, you have to, or like each relation of production, you'd have to predict what's the probability of going to all the other ones.
Yeah, and then you don't understand, like, you have to, how do you come up with that probability of transition? You have to pluck it out of your arse, right? And like, no, well, I'm serious.
I mean, not necessarily.
I'm serious though. I think I'm pretty serious. Like
paper, yeah. I mean,
you say this is 25%. Oh yeah, bang, whoo, yeah, great. Well, grand. Well, now we just know what happens if you plug in that 25%. Like the thing I'm saying is like maybe, right? you could get into, like, look at what the ICCC, or is it the International Climate Change Panel, do IPCC reports.
IPCC,
and,
yeah.
And they build like world models for all the different geological processes, goddamn loads of them, and they plug them all together, and like they're constantly revising them. I know a friend of mine works for the British Meteorological Office, and like some of his papers were literally this stretch of coastline that's like 5 miles long, and the way the coral is here, and the coast and the water responds back that way, and what happens in that small, very specific area under different conditions. Like, that's his PhD, for God's sake. You know, it's literally stuff like that. And, you know, are we going to build a model of world political stuff on the scale of the IPCC? Like, that's kind of what you have to get to. And even when you do that, it's far from like a kind of a scientific thing, in the sense that you can run it and test it and know what it is, because, you know, it's just mind-boggling. You can't get to that level of it. I just don't think it's a viable strategy for people, for socialists, to build a world political model. Like, I just think it's...
Well, because the complexity of a system is so high?
Not just the complexity. Like, you can get it to predict maybe what'll happen in a few days. Yeah. But like, what'll it tell you in 10 years? And it can't predict what the changing political formations will be, you know? So it's not a predictive model. It's like a model to cohere with what has happened in the past. I you know, like, and maybe that will give you some understanding, but maybe it won't, because it's so bloody complex. It's a function of what you're putting into it.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to, like, if you're theorizing about like how it works, it's important to take account of the empirical data that you have. Like, in the past, what's happened in the past, but
right,
you know, like,
but that's what he's doing here. That's what McNair's doing here.
But I mean,
and you're
like,
bombing him for it.
No, I mean, but like, it shouldn't be like it doesn't need to be like, it needs to account for it, but it doesn't need to like it needs to have like a logical structure that is something other than the empirical stuff.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he does that too, right? Like, he gives reasons in the other chapters for why a peasant revolution will not work, and it's based on the economic interests of the peasantry and the way that they're integrated into a mode of production.
Well, I think that would be a good argument.
Yeah, this is a summary, though, right? Like, this is wrapping up the book. It's not the introducing the theory.
Let's do the last one. Anybody have a problem with this one? The self-emancipation of the working class requires a working class to lay its hands collectively on the means of production. This does not mean state ownership, which is merely a legal form. Without democratic republicanism, the legal form of state ownership means private ownership by state bureaucrats. It means the working class collectively decides how the means of production are used. Anybody have any problems with that?
What is to ensure that a democratic republic stays democratic and doesn't just become a bastardization of itself? It just becomes about bureaucrats holding on to this as like as a political class or whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, Sophia, the answer would be some sort of democratic republicanism, and how thoroughly democratically republican those institutions are would be the only ostensible guarantor. So one would have to take those forms very seriously.
So you have to be like extra sure that you're democratic when you're doing this thing.
You know, that's his answer. You know, frankly, like, there's an absent discussion here where, I don't know, even like Kautsky and like some of the other like social democrats were only interested in like nationalizing the commanding heights, and were pretty like fine with leaving a bunch of like small private property holdings and retaining some market relations, just so that they didn't replace everything with a state monopoly. Because of a sort of libertarian skepticism of state ownership of everything. And again, here it says, this does not mean state ownership of the means of production. So without democratic republicanism, the legal form of state ownership means this by state bureaucrats. But like with, democratic republicanism, he seems to endorse state ownership in a way that seems fairly centralized, but it wouldn't count as a state, but it sounds like it.
It feels like he's doing like a bunch of like a more sneaky version of the kind of like wordplay that like Marxists can do. That's like makes a lot of anarchists and a lot of non-converts, if you will, kind of uneasy. So like how can we elaborate this in a way that eases these concerns and also doesn't just try to like replace it with more sneaky language, like maybe like the higher like echelons of government, kind of like Cybersyn or like cybernetics or whatever, is just like going to intervene in local affairs if there's like pain signals.
Can I just bring up what he says about the Democratic Republic? Because I think this is useful information for this discussion. He says, the only form through which the working class can take political power and lay collective hands on the means of production is the Democratic Republic. This does not mean rule of law parliamentary constitutionalism, to which it is in fact opposed. It means a regime in which, in addition to the political liberties partially provided by the rule of law constitutionalism, freedom of speech, assembly, association, movement, etc., and an extension of these liberties, all public officials are elected and recallable. There is universal military training and service and the right to bear arms and political rights in the armed forces, generalized trial by jury, freedom of information, and so on. In particular, democratic republicanism implies that what has to be decided centrally for effective common action should be decided centrally, but what does not have to be decided centrally should be decided locally or sectorally. Rail timetables, for example. Self-government of the localities, not Bonapartist centralism, but equally not constitutional federalism, which hands the ultimate power to the lawyers and turns the rights of the units of the federation into a form of private property. And he goes on to say, without the principles of democratic republicanism, there is precisely private ownership by individuals or groups of information, of institutional powers, and of political careers. That is the meaning of the bureaucracies of the former socialist countries, of the trade unions, of the socialist and communist parties, and of Trotskyist sects. Mm-hmm. So when I said earlier that I didn't have a problem with the statement, it was with that background information in mind. And I think that would overlap a lot with what you were saying about Cybersyn. You could see something like Cybersyn figuring into that kind of situation.
I literally in my book wrote down Stafford Beer beside that paragraph.
Well, Stafford Beer is one of the only theorists that has developed a positive option or proposal for this, and the way it's stated here is a bit more avoidant. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Of course, this is the hope. It's not specified what his alternative is, and we can fill it in with Stafford Beer essentially. But
hopefully,
well, yeah, right. I don't think it totally solves all the skepticism, but it is in a big way, at least for nuclear power plants or things that you really don't want to leave up to workers' control totally. There are some big common resources that would fall under the means of production almost unambiguously, unless you're crazy, even for super some anarchists, you know what I mean?
When I debate these ideas with anarchists, I actually go to nuclear power plants and I would be look, if you want to throw a fuss and not work your job at the nuclear power plant, tough shit, because if you don't, that shit could kill a lot of people, that there's some things it can't just be decentralized all good times for every little piece of infrastructure,
There has to be something at some level. And I guess what's fudged over here is, he nods towards it, how much of things has to be decided on that level.
This is the thing where I was saying all public officials are elected and recallable. There are existing countries with bourgeois constitutions where that is a thing that exists and happens.
You can recall representatives in Arizona, technically, can't you?
I think so, yeah.
It's happened in Canada within my lifetime that people have been recalled.
There was a recall drive for the infamous Sheriff Joe Pouya.
Right.
But I think that's fine. We should have that.
Oh yeah. Just saying, it's not necessarily a radical break with the existing order at that level.
I mean, but you have to keep some elements I mean, you can't.
Yeah. No, like I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's not that extreme. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the key thing is the armed forces bit. I think is like
Yes.
a linchpin of all that.
Yes. Freedom of information, I feel like, is a thing that to a much greater extent existed in Canada when I was a child and became progressively eroded over the intervening decades. Certainly doesn't exist in the United States in any reasonable form because of the national security reasons. I think, like, again, it's a thing that exists in some degree in many countries around the world, but it's a varying degree.
I think there's definitely some limits to how people can decide how to use them. At some point, like, I think you can decide, like, what, there could be, like, public policy of, like, oh, we want to expand, like, recreation buildings. But at some point, I think you need to, like, use some algorithms to optimize how your means of production are going to be used. Like, I don't think we could just, like, decide how we're going to use these. I don't think, like, we could just vote how we're going to use the lathe.
Yeah, we should use the lathe only on steel and metal items. We should have a vote on that. I think also we should use maybe tea leaves for planning purposes. That's it's a complex system.
As long as every one of the workers contributes one leaf, that it's democratic.
And the Navier-Stokes equations haven't been solved yet. So, like, how could we do better than the tea leaves? That's what I say to you.
Finally,
well, but like, honestly speaking, though, like, there is like the beer stuff that you could point to. You could at least entertain the ideas that Cockshot brings up about this question, and then, like, I forget where it was, but I know in Eastern Europe there was a place where, like, they had like an aborted revolution, and part of the revolution was they were trying to come up with a decision-making process that, like, integrated the different sectoral interests of producers, consumers, and
was it Czechoslovakia?
Yeah. So, like, that speaks to me as like a more like concrete and informed understanding of like what this might mean, given that, like, if it's just all power to the factories, then that's going to lead to a lot of issues, right?
Yeah. On this episode, you heard the theme tune The Order of the Pharaonic Jesters and The Night of the Purple Moon by Sun Ra and his orchestra. Thank you for listening, and please join me for the next episode of From Alpha to Omega. This show is a member of the Emancipation Network, a Marxist podcast and research collective. Make sure to check out our network sister podcasts, General Intellect Unit and Swampside Chats.